Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Choi, the moderator of this session. The topic of this session is the future of the alliance. I'm very much delighted to host moderate this session, actually, because we have covered very important issues, but we have not covered the future of the alliance. I'm sure the topic will give us opportunity to discuss about the challenges and opportunities in realizing the future alliance. This morning, the MJ mentioned about the necessity for both countries to think about the beyond North Korea, beyond the immediate problem right now. It seems actually Korea and the U.S. has adopted two joint declarations. One was in 2009 joint vision statement, and second one was the 2013 the joint declaration. We actually laid out some visions for the future, but I think there are some problems or challenges ahead of us. So how we are going to handle those challenges is quite critical in realizing those visions we have adopted already. We used to say it couldn't be better than this during the Im administration. But there are some concerns on our part as well as on the United States. For example, how we are going to solve this nuclear cooperation agreement or the OPCON transfer was raised again. So we have to think the future thoroughly and then manage the process very well. We have very distinguished panelists today here. None of them needs any kinds of introduction, but let me briefly introduce you the panelists. On my left, Dr. Jeong, he's a member of the 19th National Assembly of South Korea. He is a member of the Saenuri Party. Please welcome him with the big applause. And next to him, Professor Jeong is a professor of international relations at the Graduate School of International Studies, Yonsei University. Now he's ambassador for national security affairs.
Thank you.
Next to him is Ambassador Mark Minton. He's the president of the Korea Society. He was U.S. ambassador. He served as a U.S. ambassador to Mongolia. Next to him, Ambassador Douglas Paal, Vice President for Studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He served as a Vice Chairman of JP Morgan Chase International, and also served the U.S. Representative of Taipei. Last but least, Dr. Paul Wolfowitz. He was former president of the World Bank and Deputy Secretary of Defense during the Bush administration. Each speaker will speak about 5 to 6 minutes, and then after finishing the first round, we will go into the Q&A session. And first, Dr. Kill.
Well, good afternoon. Yeah, wonderful to be back to town, where I lived and worked several years back, and pleasure to be a part of this very meaningful gathering. Well, I think most of in this room might agree the relations between South Korea and the United States cannot be better. But most of you also agree that we cannot take the current situation of our bilateral relations, take it for granted, and we should not be a victim of the current complacency. So let me use some of my time to elaborate what I'm thinking about the factors which might affect the future of the alliance. I think first issue, we have discussed earlier this morning. So U.S. military capability, whether we can count on in the immediate future. And the second issues we should think about is rise of China. That issue might be discussed later of this session. But the rise of China, just the numbers, South Korea's trade volume with China is bigger than South Korea's trade with the U.S. and Japan combined. And human exchanges and Korean overseas students, much bigger numbers than Korean students in the U.S. And travelers between Beijing and Seoul surpassed Korean travelers to the U.S. major cities. Those numbers are very important to Korea. Meaning is rise of China is, in addition to China's policy toward the north, we just share some feeling that the Beijing's policy toward North Korea is slightly changing, a little different from their previous stance leaning toward Pyongyang. So that means strategically or structurally, South Korean people and the government feels closer to the Beijing than before. So that might be another challenge to our South Korea's relations with the United States. And third one is probably most immediate challenge of North Korea's nuclear issues. So I think we should face the reality, the 20 years experience of our tackling North Korea's nuclear weapon program is not a big success, or some people say that is a failure. So from now on, how can we means our alliance, ROC and the U.S. alliance, can tackle these issues from now on, should affect our relations of 50 years, 60 years alliance. Meaning is, after exhausting all diplomatic solutions, we are urged to try to fresh start a new approach, including some engaging peace mechanism, including replacing armistice treaty into peace treaty. So in that process, ROK's relations, United States, might be affected. So that is the third factors we should face. Another one I should emphasize, we have not discussed yet, this panel, is a Japan factor. As we all witnessed, Japan is moving toward to the right, rather very conservative. Somebody can say Japan is going to the normal state. Some people say that, or share the concern, Japan is moving to extreme right. But according to the recent polls taken by the Asan Institute, today's host, is only 19% of South Koreans think U.S. is handling a Japan factor in a fairly manner. Is only 19%. Meaning is absolute majority of South Korean people think U.S. mishandling the Japan issues moving toward the right. So that issues how the U.S. is handling the Japan. Might affect the South Korean public's the perspective to see our traditional ally, the United States. Final issues I want to say is several dormant issues which might be flammable depending on how Washington is handling recurrent issues of military burden sharing. We will discuss, engaged this year. Another one is replacing or revising civil nuclear cooperation agreement between two countries. And the third one is partly revising some provisions of Korea-US free trade agreement. All those issues are very flammable issues which give us some warnings, so we should not be complacent with the current situation between two countries. That's the several factors I want you to think about, which might affect the future of our alliance.
It seems to me that you have given us food for thought instead of any kinds of answer. So you will be asked to answer your question later. Professor Lee, it's your turn.
Well, thank you, Kang. It's a real pleasure to be here in Washington with so many people who have worked directly and otherwise on behalf of the ROK-US Alliance. And so as Senator Warren and the Congressman said this afternoon, I'm sure there are either Korean War veterans or maybe your parents or your grandfathers fought in the Korean War. And as someone who was born after the Korean War, I was born in 1960, let me take this opportunity to thank all of my American friends who fought in the Korean War, who have sustained the alliance for the last 60 years. And I think this really is testament to the wonderful relationship that's been fostered. Truly a very unnatural alliance that has become one of the most critical in the Asia Pacific. I'll be very, very quick since I'd rather be engaged with the audience, time permitting. First of all, I think the fact that this major conference is being held in Washington is testament to how far the alliance has come. I think any Korean think tank worthy of its name, they've done conferences here in Washington and in Seoul, but to imagine that a Korean think tank would be supporting and sponsoring a major conference of this type here in Washington really is something that is truly remarkable. So I'd like to thank Ham Jae-bong and MJ and Choi Kang, who just joined Asan just a few days ago. For me, the alliance, as we think about the future, I think we're at this critical juncture because we have moved from an alliance that was basically unilateral dependence and over-reliance on overwhelming emphasis on security issues. And it is now moving towards an alliance that is, I guess, resembling more of a mutual convergence. And regardless of whether you agree with the administration's pivot to Asia strategy, I believe that we are now at a point where if you canvass Asia Pacific from an American perspective, and you ask yourself, who are our key partners that can work on security issues, on economic issues, human rights, women's rights, etc., I think Korea really stands out as a unique middle power. And in that sense, from an intrinsically American perspective, I would argue that Korea plays a crucial role that expands beyond peninsular issues. From a South Korean perspective, obviously we have depended on the U.S. for security. We will continue to do so. But as Korean power basically increases a little bit more, I think the key question is what type of responsibilities will Korea assume, both on the peninsula and beyond. And so the question of power and responsibility, which was not really discussed by previous Korean governments, is now basically at the core of the issue. What can Korea do to enhance stability and security in Northeast Asia and in broader world perspectives? But as my father, a former diplomat, always used to tell me, you know, Chung, he said, when times are good, it's a good time to ask yourself why it's such a good time. And I think we have to also think about some speed bumps that are ahead. And I would argue that there are three major speed bumps that the alliance has to think about. And the first, of course, is the $64,000 question. How do you cope with the rise of China? I just came back from a short trip to Beijing and Shanghai, and I was just amazed at the transformation that China has gone through over the last 10, 15 years. But if you look at where China is headed under the Xi Jinping leadership and beyond, nobody really knows exactly what role China will play. And I think I'm more positive than before, but I'm sure all of you realize that in the so-called new era, whereby you have the U.S. and China on core security issues, there might be some convergence, but there's more divergence than convergence at the present time. And so how the U.S. manages ties with China has a crucial impact on countries like South Korea. Not too long ago, an American official who visited Seoul asked me, why is it that South Koreans don't really emphasize or vocalize the so-called China threat? And I said, you know, if you look at all the 14 countries that China shares borders with, there are only two countries that I can recall, one that I'm more familiar with, Korea, that has lived with China for 2,000 plus years. We have been invaded by forces from the northern part of Korea for 900 odd times. So although you may think that we are not vocalizing the so-called China issue, understand that Koreans have this DNA that really has been tested in more ways than one. And so we may not vocalize our concerns or anxieties, but they're still there all the same. But as a result, the problem is you cannot take the Korean Peninsula and stick it to Australia because we will obviously have to live with the so-called China factor more than any other Asian power. And so how the U.S. manages ties with China and how South Korea manages ties within that context is a key driver. The second major issue, I would argue, for the alliance is what I call the paradox of Asia's rise, or the twin faces of Asia's rise. Everything that is positive about Asia, all of you are familiar with. Spectacular economic growth, more trade opportunities, greater opportunities for people-to-people exchange, and the list goes on. But for every good thing that has happened in Asia over the past 3-4 decades, every major negative driver in the world is also, they also have footprints in Asia. And so how Asia collectively deals with these huge challenges from significant demographic shifts. China is entering into an era of slower growth. Japan and South Korea already have one of the lowest birth rates in the world, very fast, rapidly aging societies, environmental pollution concerns, new maritime challenges, and the list goes on. And so when everybody talks about so-called Asia's rise and China's rise and India's rise in a very positive way, I don't disagree, but I think it's only half empty or half full. The discourse really must be much more fuller. And in that sense, Korea has to really think about the so-called downsides of Asia's rise. And the third, of course, transition, which we will be all concerned with over the next 10, 15 years, is that the Korean question is now moving from the conceptual to the policy arena. And for the first time, we'll have to think about what a unified Korea looks like and what type of relationship that unified Korea will have with the regional powers in the U.S. And here I'm a bit more optimistic. I believe that for the first time, there is a convergence of views, or the beginning of the convergence of views, between the U.S. and China and other regional powers. That a unified Korea under South Korean auspices is a positive factor for regional stability and prosperity. So let me leave it there, and if there's time, then I'd be more than willing to take questions from the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeong-min, you raised three challenging questions like the rise of China and paradox of Asia, and also what should be the relation of unified Korea with neighboring countries. I think the last one is quite challenging on how we are going to orchestrate our policy, and also this we talked about the unification, but we haven't really thought about what should be the desirable architecture after the unification. So I think that's a great food for thought. I'd like to invite Ambassador Minton for his talk, please.
Thank you very much. I'd be remiss if I didn't add to the comments of many others that I want to thank the Asan Institute for initiating this conference. I understand it will continue. This is obviously going to be a major opportunity for both sides to look at the bilateral relationship, the regional relationship, and even beyond that. I also want to thank you for all the acknowledgement and recognition you've given to the veterans who served in the Korean War and this 60th anniversary of the armistice. This has deep personal meaning to me. I don't know. I may be the only person in the room who has a living father who's a veteran of the Korean War. He's 97 years old, and that his experience there has been a part of my growing up. I would like to take the topic of this session literally and explore some of how the existing alliance might evolve in the future to serve our shared interest in an era which has already been noted that is very unlike the era in which it was created 60 years ago. My basic point will be that the alliance, in order to continue to provide security on the peninsula and serve as a platform for U.S.-Korean cooperation regionally and globally, should be expanded to develop a complementary bilateral diplomatic strategy altogether as closely coordinated as the traditional military one. I think I have to say at the very beginning, this is no way to suggest that the traditional role of the alliance, the deterrent role of the alliance, maintaining peace on the peninsula and security for the Republic of Korea in the face of an enduring and even heightened North Korea threat, all this remains compelling. And nothing I'm going to say about a diplomatic track is meant to detract from that continuing central role of the alliance. I'd like to return in a minute to the concept of diplomacy and the alliance with regard to North Korea and the dynamic in the region itself. But first, there are many reasons out there beyond what's happening with North Korea that we should articulate a larger definition of our common interests and even beyond peninsular issues. The rapid development of South Korea's democratic institutions, global economic reach, and role in international diplomacy now calls forth, I think, a greater degree of cooperation. The list of transnational issues of common concern grows longer each year. Anti-piracy, international peacekeeping, promotion of democracy and development in third countries, and I saw that in Mongolia as a vivid example of cooperation. Clean energy, environment, the list goes on and on. Korea's hosting of the G20 and nuclear security summits in recent years